Hello, my name is Christopher Mitchell, and I'm going to talk to you today about my battery-powered car. Here's a little picture of it. It looks a little different in person, but I kind of pulled out the Arduino board so you could see everything in the photo here. Okay, so first I want to talk about the constraints here. So the main constraints given to us in this assignment was that stuff was supposed to be homemade, generally, no car kits. We weren't really given a whole lot of structure about how exactly to make this car move. We were just kind of told to figure it out on our own, just using the motor of the type in the Arduino kit and using the Arduino board and the breadboard. Personally, my main constraint was my lack of mechanical knowledge. I came from an anthropology program at OU that I did about 10 years ago. And so when I was in school, I was doing the opposite of this kind of stuff. And I've got very low skills. I've got low amount of tools that I understand how to use, really. But I've been getting better throughout this semester. I even did some soldering for the first time. And so that was my main constraint, was just sort of conceptually figuring out how to go to the next step here. And so my early design, I was kind of clueless, but I rode a bike as a kid, and so I figured I could use a gear system. Now here's a funny little drawing I did on the first day of lab where we talked about this project. And the picture looks a little funny, but I thought it was a good idea at the time. So those flower-shaped things toward the center of the photo were supposed to be gears. Now the motor that came in my Arduino kit is like this, and it has a very smooth rod coming out of the end. Now I had no idea how to get this motor attached to gears, the ones that came with my kit, because they just didn't fit in snugly. So I ended up ordering a couple of other motors that were the same size but had this thing here at the end. It's a kind of looked like something I could attach motors to. So if you look at this picture, the motor was supposed to turn this gear, which was attached to this belt system, which would feed this belt across into eventually a larger object, which my axle would go through. And now, initially, I wanted to use the motion of the motor to translate to motion of both of these axles. I really would have liked to have all four tires moving, even when the car is lifted up off the ground. And basically, my gear system that I wanted to do ended up being too difficult. I had to drop this after about a week. I was really struggling to keep the gears in place where I wanted and needed them. I figured out that the better I kept my gears in place, the harder it was to get them to turn. And I spoke to an engineering friend of mine, and he told me I was probably operating beyond the scope of my skill level and my materials and the amount of time I had. Surely I could have gone to the library and used the 3D printer if I had had something designed quick enough, like a gearbox, but I'm not convinced that the ones I would have designed would have been any better. I spent about a week on it and I couldn't get them to work. So I ended up scrapping that and going with my final design is much simpler, which I actually really like and appreciate. It's sort of the opposite of the last one, whereas with the last idea with the gears, I kept finding myself wanting to order more things and try new things. But this design that I did eventually required almost nothing, and I really liked that. And so I basically went back to the original motor that came with my kit with the smooth rod, and I attached that to the underside of the body of this car. And I cut out some spaces to make clearance for the tire and to make clearance for the wires, because inside everything will sit inside there, the breadboard, the Arduino, and the battery. And this actually ended up working really well. I was quite happy with it. My average speed was about 5.2 feet per second. My biggest issue with my results is that I was having pretty regular mechanical failures between the trials, and I could never figure out if there was a specific wire that was coming loose or anything like that. And so generally I was having to take quite a bit of it apart, the breadboard, and put it back together. Sometimes even just taking the breadboard and lifting it out of the body and then setting it back in would get the motor to work. Now I understand that if this was if I was more serious about this car, I probably would need to solder everything into a more traditional circuit board. But I was not really comfortable doing that at this point, being very new to soldering. The first soldering I did was on this. You can see on this picture here, the wires kept leaving my motor for some reason, and so I learned how to do a little soldering, and I got them to stick together that way. But I was afraid of soldering everything and making it harder to edit or deal with. And I didn't want to go too far outside of the scope of what I should have been doing, because I tend to get fixated on little things that take too long when I should be focused on the bigger picture. But the bigger picture of this was that I was able to make this work. I probably just need to add something to the top of the vehicle to help keep the breadboard and the Arduino separate, and that might take care of my mechanical issues. So in conclusion here, I feel like for me, simpler was better. Getting it to move as quickly as I did was surprising. But I really would like to do some future work with a gear system. I may work on something like that this summer. I find the gears incredibly interesting. I find it much more interesting as a concept than what I ended up dealing with. I like to think about things like this. I know this type of bicycle from the past doesn't actually operate with gears, but I like that these bikes were so easy to use because the way it was designed, it only took one rotation of the pedals to translate to one full rotation of that giant tire. So you can see how that would lead to more efficient movement than some other styles. And I would hope to work with that more in the future, and I am interested to see if anybody else in this class did a gear design. Thank you.